Greetings, men of 222. It's great to be with you today again. We're continuing our Common Men, Uncommon Stories series, and the hero of our story today is going to be Jonathan. You remember David's friend and Saul's son? I'm going to use three stories basically from the Bible about Jonathan to demonstrate specific manhood traits that he personally exhibited. We're going to look at three stories. So what is Jonathan's story? Well, let's go back just a second. Chapter 17 tells us the story of David and Goliath. Remember that obviously, but see, Jonathan had never met David up to that point. So in chapter 18, we get to see what happens when Jonathan meets David. And here's what the text tells us. It says, "Now it came about when he finished speaking to Saul that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as himself." Now, some people have tried to take those verses and make Jonathan to be something less than he is, effeminate, and it's just an abortion of Scripture, to be honest with you. To go on, it says, "Saul took him that day and did not let him return to his dad's house. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself." Isn't that cool? Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and he gave it to David, with his armor, including his sword and his bow and his belt. Wow. Jonathan and David hit it off instantly, became instant friends in a way that most of us never have a friend. He was the son of a king, and yet he became the friend of a lowly shepherd boy. And in this story, we see that Jonathan was David's teammate. He was a man of action, and he put others first. How do we see that? Well, first of all, he was a teammate because his soul was knit to David's soul. They became lifelong friends. They became friends even when Jonathan had to make a decision as to whether or not to stick with his friend or go with his dad. Remarkable story. We're going to talk more about that later. He's a man of action because he makes a covenant. But let's remember that a covenant, like a promise, except a much bigger one, a covenant is only as good as the person who makes it, and it's only good if you consider that it's not just a promise. It's not just a covenant. It's the key is it completed? And Jonathan was a man who completed that covenant. And lastly, he put others first. How? Well, he gave all these things to David, his bow and his sword and his belt. Why? Because that was part of the covenant. He wanted David to have something of his, and he wanted to show David just how much he cared about it. He put others first. Albert Schweitzer once said this, and I think it's so cool, and I think it's demonstrated by Jonathan. He said, "In everyone's life, at some time, our inner fire goes out. It is then burst into flame by an encounter with another human being." That was Jonathan. We should all be thankful for those who rekindle the inner spirit. Do you have one of those guys? Do you have a Jonathan in your life? Do you? Wow. It's so important that we have a Jonathan in our life, someone who will build us up, who will rekindle that flame when our spirit goes out, basically. Now, the second story is chapter 19, verses 1 through 5, and we read, "Now Saul told Jonathan, his son, and all his servants to put David to death." Holy mackerel. Here's his friend, and his dad comes to him, his dad who's not only his dad, but his dad is the king, and he comes to him and he say, "Go find David and kill him." But Jonathan, Saul's son, greatly delighted in David, and so Jonathan told David, saying, "Hey, Saul my father is seeking to put you to death. Thou therefore please be on guard in the morning and stay in a secret place and hide yourself. I'll go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak with my father about you, and if I find out anything, I'll tell you." Good friend. Then Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and said to him, "Do not let the king sin against his servant David, since he has not sinned against you, and since his deeds have been very beneficial to you." He did take out Goliath, right? "For he took his life in his hand and struck the Philistine, and the Lord brought about a great deliverance for all of Israel. You saw it, and you rejoiced in it. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by putting David to death without a cause? In this story, we see Jonathan standing firm against the devil. Where's the devil, you say? Well, my sense is that Saul was demonically troubled, and if you read through the scriptures, you see that consistently. His soul was demonically troubled a lot. And so his words were, his command was, kill David. Jonathan said, no, I'm not going to do that. He stood firm. He was unwavering. You know, he's also a man of commitment, wasn't he? He didn't abandon his friends just because times got tough. Even though this was a very difficult situation, if he didn't abandon David, what was going to happen to him? Well, potentially the king would kill him because he had disobeyed an order from the king. But I think there's a greater lesson here, and that is this. You have a friend, and that friend screws up, really messes up, and does something really heinous. Maybe it's murder. Maybe it's, you name it, you pick the problem. I've seen so many times when people have abandoned their friends because they did something terrible. You know, it's at that point that your friend needs you more than he ever did before. Maybe it's at that point that you'll be able to speak into his life in a way that you never have been able to before. Because God's opening that door through that misery. Don't abandon your friends in tough times. Great friends hang in there. He was unwavering because his father, the king, wanted his friend killed, as I said, and in fact, he'd ordered him to be killed. Not following that order could have gotten him killed. But the story I really want to camp on is 1 Samuel 14, 1 through 6. And I'm not going to read all of it verbatim because it has a bunch of names in it that will put you to sleep, and I don't want that to happen. I want you to listen to the essence of the story. Now the day came that Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young man who was carrying his armor, "Come and let us cross over to the Philistine garrison that's on the other side." But he didn't tell his dad, not because he was being deceitful, but because he wanted to do this on his own. He was a man of initiative also. Well, his dad was staying in Migron, and the people who were with him were a bunch of folks, warriors, one of whom was Phinehas, the son of Eli, the priest of the Lord at Shiloh, who was wearing an ephod. And he was there wearing this ephod because this was a robe that you put on when you wanted to inquire of the Lord. The people didn't know that Jonathan had gone, and between the passes by which Jonathan sought to cross over to the Philistine garrison, there was a sharp crag on the one side and a sharp crag on the other side. And in other words, it was really rough territory. That's the point. And Jonathan said to the man who was carrying his armor, listen to this, this is great. He said to the man who was carrying his armor, "Come and let us cross over to the garrison of the uncircumcised. Perhaps the Lord will work for us." Why? For the Lord is not restrained to save by many or by few. Isn't that remarkable? If God's will, he is not restrained in terms of the numbers of people that he needs to get it done. Remember Gideon? The Lord actually took guys away from Gideon for that very reason. And Jonathan, he's stepping out, man. This guy here is courageous, right? Holy mackerel. In this story, we see that Jonathan is strong and courageous. He's proactive. He rejects passivity. Proactive because he suggests attacking the Philistines even though humanly they are far outnumbered. He's strong and courageous because he overcomes his natural fear and relies on God. You know, it's been said that that courage is not the absence of fear, it's the willingness to battle through the fear. And that's, you know, when warriors go into battle, they're afraid. But the great ones are the ones who put that aside and they battle through it, just what Jonathan did. He's strong and courageous because he puts that fear away. And by the way, this is not the only time that those who want to describe Jonathan as effeminate, this is not the only time he does this. In 1 Samuel 13:3, it says, Jonathan smote the garrison of the Philistines that was in Geba, and the Philistines heard of it. He had already whacked them. And now he's coming after them again. He rejects passivity because he didn't have to confront his fears. Because he had to confront his fears and trust God. But he acted. That's the point I want to make here. He acted, and he acted in the right way. Teddy Roosevelt once said, in a moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. And then he went on to say, and I don't believe this part, he said, the next best thing you can do is the wrong thing. I don't buy that. But he said, and the worst thing you can do is nothing. His point was, God doesn't move any parked cars. Most of the time, it's important that we are willing to get up and go off the couch and go and do what the Lord commands us to do. So what are the takeaways from Jonathan's story? Well, first of all, as I said, he's been portrayed as being effeminate. Some have even tried to make him out to be homosexual, and that's generally those in the homosexual community who have tried to pervert the Bible in this sense. You need to know all of the Bible. You need to know it, because if you know it, you know that Jonathan was a tough guy. Tough guy. He was a man of action. He was a great teammate. He put others first, including this lowly shepherd boy. And we see that he was unwavering and he stood firm in the face of demonic oppression from Saul. In another instance, we see many times that he was strong and courageous, that he was proactive, that he rejected passivity. You know, this guy was a real man. He was a real friend. Do you have a Jonathan in your life? Let that sink in for a second. Do you have a Jonathan in your life? Are you looking for a Jonathan in your life? Someone with whom your soul is knit, someone that you can depend upon, you can get good counsel from, and you know has your best interest at heart all the time. Do you have one? If you don't, you need to be finding one. Our friend Gene Graves often says this about decisions, and it certainly was shown by Jonathan. He says this, decisions, often says about decisions that there is an easy way or there is the right way. Rarely are they the same. Do the right thing, not the easy thing, like Jonathan did. In our ministry with the Crusaders, many times Mike and I, it almost was like clockwork before the season started. Something came up where we had to make a decision, and the decision generally was the kind of decision that we either had to hold fast for the Lord or we would slink away. And I believe that each time Mike and I made the right decision, not the easy decision. And here's what I find interesting about that. The more we made the right decision, the easier the right decision became because we were used to doing it. And God honored us as a result of that. Hey, be intentional this week as you honor Jesus. See you next Saturday, Lord willing, and the creeks don't rise.